Commentary on Act 1, Scene 2, King Lear. In this scene, we see Shakespeare's secondary plot. The scene begins with Edmund talking to the audience, alone on the stage. It's set in the Earl of Gloucester's castle, where Edmund then enters holding a letter. He begins to say, "Thou nature art my goddess, to thy law my services abound." He first states how his belief is the survival of the fittest, how he does not believe in the Bible or Christianity, but in nature and survival of the fittest. He then goes on to say, "Wherefore should I stand in the plague of custom?" He doesn't believe in the customs of society and believes them to be a plague and not to his, but the traditions are wrong. He then goes on to say, "And permit the curious of nations to deprive me." He doesn't believe that other humans can make judgment on people's status because of their birth. He then goes on to talk about his brother, his, as he says, lag of a brother, why bastard, wherefore base. This line shows us how he feels about his brother and his position, that his brother will inherit his father's inheritance, and he's not very happy about it. He calls he is at his birth he was a bastard, unlike his brother, which is why his brother Edgar inherits his father's estate and title. This line also tells us of Edmund's obsession with the word base, which is also repeated over the next few lines. Despite having an aristocratic father, Edmund is of common birth, and he has no claim to a title or any of his father's possessions like his brother. His illegitimacy makes him base, the bottom of the social pile. He then goes on to say, "My mind is generous," showing that he's a gentleman. And he says, "My shape is true, and on this madam's issue. Why brand they us with base, with baseness, bastardly base, which is the repetition of the word base, repeating his low status within the current society. He then goes to talk about his creation. As we've heard in the scene before this, his father called it sport, how he was conceived with Edmund's mother. And Edmund states here that lusty stealth of nature take more composition of fierce quality than doth within a dull, stale, tired bed. How he's talking, how the passion of his conception leads to his current power, and that his brother, who was born in a social marriage within a dull, stale, tired bed, commenting on the relationship between his father and his stepmother, I'm assuming, and his stepmother, in the creation of his brother, led to a lesser quality person. He then goes on to say, "Got tween asleep and wake," which is commenting on his routine and the routine of his life. He then goes to talk about legitimate Edgar, and how he says, "I must have your land, our father's love is to the bastard Edmund himself as to the legitimate." He comments on how his father's love for him is the same as his brother, but by birth and status, he's not equal. He then goes on to sarcastically say, "Fine word legitimate," commenting on his belief that legitimacy is nothing. This goes back to his survival of the fittest. He has also stated his intentions. He wants his brothers claimed his father's land, and his illegitimacy is preventing him from getting this. He then comments on, he says, if this letter speed and my invention thrive, he hopes that this letter will be effective quickly. And in this letter it states that there's a fake plot that Edgar plans to kill his father, which is not true. And he is praying that his plot will thrive and he will eventually get his father's land and inheritance and title. And he says, Edmund the base shall top the legitimate, saying he will become more than his brother. How he states, I grow, I prosper, now gods stand up for bastards. This is his protest against his illegitimacy, against his status in society, how it's low compared to others, and he wants God to stand up for the bastards. He wants to be equal to his brother and have a claim to his father's wealth and power. At the beginning of this scene comments on sociology and gives us an insight to Shakespeare's character. And then at the end of this speech, the Earl of Gloucester, Edmund and Edgar's father, enters. He comes in commenting on what he's just seen. Kent banished thus, and France in colour parted, the king gone tonight, prescribe his power continued to exhibition, all this done upon the gad. In this short little paragraph there are 6 exclamation marks. This enforces the shock and horror of this small little paragraph. And the end of this this comments on the shock of what Kent has just come from, the scene where King Lear banishes his daughter Cordelia and his other daughters Goneril and Regan, the ones who don't legitimately love their father, and he banishes the one that does, which is in contrast to this scene, in fact. He then notices Edmund and says, Edmund, how now? What news? So please your lordship. This point is where Edmund snatches the letter, his fake letter, into his chest to hide it from his father, instantly gaining his father's attention. This is how his father notices him. In a summary, this little section is showing how his father is lost for words, and the natural order has been disintegrated, and upon thy gav shows the impulsivity of the speech, of what has just happened before this. Edmund then goes on to say, so how please your lordship none? What so earnest seek you to put that letter? Says Gloucester. I know no news, my lord, says Edmund. And then they basically comments on his Gloucester commenting on Edmund's hiding of the letter. Edmund then goes on to say, nothing, my lord, which is another repetition of the word nothing, which really is a hidden meaning, which really means everything. He says nothing, just like Cordelia says in the scene before this, and King Lear himself, nothing, which is maybe a possible common theme throughout the story. He uses it here to gain his father's attention. Gloucester is then interested in what Edgar has to hide. He then goes on to say, the quality of nothing hath not such need to hide itself. With this short 2 lines is an echo of Cordelia's parents' speech, and this is how that speech was loyal, and this one is a lie. and shows how Lear's binded to the truth, but Gloucester also fails to see it, but physically this is a symbol. He then goes on to see, I shall come, if it be nothing, I shall not need spectacles, which is parallel to Lear. Edmund then goes on to say it's a letter from his brother, and that it is not fit for Gloucester's reading, which again encourages Gloucester to want to read this letter. And then Gloucester... I should also comment on Edmund's proper mannerisms in talking to his father. He uses large amounts of such. He starts off saying, I beseech you, and he, in the line 29, he says, I know no news, my lord, showing his respect to his father, which is gaining his trust. He uses it when he first speaks to his father, so he states, so please your lordship, trying to show he's the right son, I suppose. He then goes on line 41. He then goes on to say how this letter shall, I will just say it, I shall offend either to detain or give it. How even if he gives it to his father, he's going to hurt him, which is his intention, and he's hiding it to make his father want to see the letter even more. This whole scene basically comments on the dramatic. This is a dramatic irony. How this is Shakespeare's second plot, where we see a reflection. The subplot was we see a reflection of the main plot. And this is This scene comments on Edmund's plan to take his father's wealth and to a barrier between him and his brother. A barrier between his father and his brother, so which leaves him clear to inherit his father's wealth and power. And being the illegitimate son, with Edgar in the picture, the legitimate, he will never receive. The end.